Gothic Time with Sheridan Le Fanu and his short story called The Magician Earl. It is well known that the great Earl of Desmond, though history pretends to dispose of him differently, lives to this hour enchanted in his castle with all his household at the bottom of the lake. There was not in his day in all the world so accomplished a magician as he. His fairest castle stood upon an island in the lake, and to this he brought his young and beautiful bride, whom he loved but too well, for she prevailed upon his folly to risk all to gratify her imperious caprice. They had not been long in this beautiful castle, when she one day presented herself in the chamber in which her husband studied his forbidden art, and there implored him to exhibit before her some of the wonders of his evil science. He resisted long, but her entreaties, tears, and wheedlings were at length too much for him, and he consented. But before beginning those astonishing transformations with which he was about to amaze her, he explained to her the awful conditions and dangers of the experiment. Alone in this vast apartment, the walls of which were lapped far below by the lake whose dark waters lay waiting to swallow them, she must witness a certain series of frightful phenomena, which once commenced he could neither abridge nor mitigate, and if throughout their ghastly succession she spoke one word or uttered one exclamation, the castle and all that it contained would in one instant subside to the bottom of the lake, there to remain under the servitude of a strong spell for ages. The dauntless curiosity of the lady having prevailed, and the oaken door of the study being locked and barred, the fatal experiment commenced. Muttering a spell as he stood before her, feathers sprout thickly over him, his face became contracted and hooked, a cadaverous smell filled the air, and with heavy winnowing wings, a gigantic vulture rose in his place, and swept round and round the room as if at the point of pouncing upon her. The lady commanded herself through this trial, and instantly another began. The bird alighted near the door, and in less than a minute changed, she saw not how, into a horribly deformed and dwarfish hag, who, with yellow skin hanging about her face and enormous eyes, swung herself on crutches towards the lady, her mouth foaming with fury, and her grimaces and contortions becoming more and more hideous every moment, till she rolled with a yell on the floor in horrible convulsion at the lady's feet, and then changed into a huge serpent with crest erect and quivering tongue. Suddenly, as it seemed on the point of darting at her, she saw her husband in its stead, standing pale before her, and, with his finger on his lip, enforcing the continued necessity of silence. He then placed himself at his length on the floor, and began to stretch himself out and out longer and longer, until his head nearly reached to the end of the vast room, and his feet to the other. This horror overcame her. The ill-starred lady uttered a wild scream, whereupon the castle and all that was within it sank in a moment to the bottom of the lake. But once in every 7th year, by night, the Earl of Desmond and his retinue emerge and cross the lake in shadowy cavalcade. His white horse is shod with silver. On that one night the Earl may ride till daybreak, and it behooves him to make good use of his time, for, until the silver shoe of his steed be worn through, the spell that holds him and his beneath the lake will retain its power. When I, Miss Anne Bailey, was a child, there was still living a man named Teague O'Neill, who had a strange story to tell. He was a smith, and his forge stood on the brow of the hill overlooking the lake on a lonely part of the road to Sherconlish, One bright moonlit night he was working very late and quite alone. The clink of his hammer and the wavering glow reflected through the open door of the bushes on the other side of the narrow road were the only tokens that told of life in Virgil for miles around. In one of the pauses of his work, he heard a ring of many hoofs ascending the steep road that passed his forge, and, standing in his doorway, he was just in time to see a gentleman on a white horse who was dressed in a fashion the like of which the smith had never seen before. This man was accompanied and followed by a mountain retinue, as strangely dressed as he were. They seemed, by the clang and clatter that announced their approach, to be riding up the hill at a hard, hurry-scurry gallop. But the pace abated as they drew near, and the rider of the white horse, who, from his grave and lordly air, he assumed to be a man of rank and accustomed to command, drew bridle and came to a halt before the smith's door. He did not speak, and all his retinue was silent, but he beckoned to the smith and pointed down to one of his horse's hoofs. Teague stooped and raised it, and held it just long enough to see that it was shod with silver shoe, which in one place, he said, was worn as thin as a shilling. Instantaneously his situation was made apparent to him by this sign, and he recoiled with terrified prayer. The lordly rider, with a look of pain and fury, struck him suddenly with something that whistled in the air like a whip, and an icy streak seemed to traverse his body as if he had been cut through with a leaf of steel. But he was without scathe or scar, as he afterwards found. At the same moment he saw the whole cavalcade break into a gallop and disappear down the hill with a momentary hurling through the air, like the flight of a volley of cannon shot. Here had been the Earl himself. He had tried one of his accustomed stratagems to lead the smith to speak to him, for it is well known that either for the purpose of abridging or mitigating his period of enchantment, he seeks to lead people to accost him. But what, in the event of his succeeding, would befall the person whom he had thus ensnarled, no one knows. The end of that exciting little tale. Do feel free to leave a comment and let me know what you thought of this little one. Hope to see you next time in a couple of weeks. Bye.